We're taking a look at some of the questions Jesus asked when he lived on earth during another era of great political, economic, and social unrest. More than any other, today's question from the Gospel of John, chapter 6, is the one that gets me every single time. This scene occurs after huge numbers of Jesus' followers have suddenly abandoned him, and turning to his remaining disciples, Jesus asks them, "Are you going to leave me too?" What stands out so much about that moment is that the crowd don't abandon him because they've suddenly discovered that Jesus is a fraud. They've seen him perform staggering miracles only the day before, and time and again they've seen his words proven true by the consistency of his character and his actions. No, the reason that so many of his followers abandon him is simply because they find his teaching to be too hard. What was it that they found so unpalatable? It was Jesus' claim that if they want to experience what it means to be fully human and fully alive, then they can't achieve that by doing their own thing or proving themselves by their own efforts. Instead, they're going to need Jesus to do it for them. They're going to have to rely totally and completely on him. Unsurprisingly, this message doesn't go down well because people don't want to need God. They want to be God. They said they wanted Jesus to be their king, but they meant the kind of king that they could control, a figurehead who would get them the political influence that they needed. They wanted a king who would overthrow Roman rule, not submit to being nailed to a wooden cross by his oppressors. They wanted a kingdom filled with all the comfortable stuff, the miracles, the free food, the community, the sense of belonging to something bigger and greater. But they didn't want a kingdom where the first will be last and the last first, or to follow the example of a king who came not to be served, but to serve. In other words, they wanted the stuff Jesus could give them, but they didn't actually want him. And when they didn't get what they wanted, they walked away. I wonder how many of us have felt tempted to do the same in these last weeks. How many of us have been feeling angry at God for allowing us to go without what we've become so used to having? I think this is quite revealing. In a season of such profound unrest, it is natural and normal to be afraid. But when our circumstances shake our faith, what that sometimes reveals is that our faith has been dependent on our circumstances rather than the one who transcends all circumstances. It's been on God's provision rather than on God himself. Now we're being forced to ask some uncomfortable questions. How much have we depended on our routine or the security of our investments or the affirmation we receive from others in our normal week? If you're a Christian, is it because you need the stuff that Christianity has helped you to get? Or are you a Christian because you need Jesus? Who are you in this for? The reason that Jesus' question hits me so hard every time is because it's just so unbelievably vulnerable. It sounds like the kind of question a child would ask his one remaining friend after the rest of the class have turned their backs on him. And it's painful to hear the question because somehow we don't feel that Jesus should be vulnerable like that. There's something that feels so wrong about people having the ability to wound God, to hurt his feelings. He's God. He has everything he needs. It shouldn't matter to him whether we walk away, and yet somehow it does. Somehow he's opened his heart to us in a way where what we do, whether we follow him or not, it actually affects him. So long as we believe that what we do doesn't really matter to God, we're going to carelessly wound him because we don't take his heart into account. And over the last weeks, many of us have been wrapped up in the question of how God is treating us. But how often have we paused to think about how we're treating him? By contrast, how astonishing Peter's response is to Jesus as he says, "Lord, to whom else would we go? You have the words of eternal life." Peter recognizes that Jesus may not always give us exactly what we want, but in him we truly do have all that we need. And without him, we have nothing at all. I remember once going to one of my friends after a relationship ended badly. And at the time, I think I was looking for some kind of comfort, perhaps something along the lines of "there are plenty more fish in the sea." And instead, she offered me what I experienced as very cold comfort indeed. She said, "Jo, God doesn't promise us a partner, he promises us himself." At the time, I remember feeling so annoyed at her words. Is that it? And yet now I look back and wonder, how could that not have been good news to me? God has promised us himself, God himself. If we find ourselves thinking, oh no, I might have to settle for God, we clearly haven't understood who God is at all. He's the one who has the words of life. Jesus Christ is the God who spoke the world into being and who even now, even in the midst of all of this, holds it together and speaks new life into us every single day. And if not Jesus, then to whom else will you go? People spend their whole lives searching for a love like this, for life like this, but you won't find it anywhere else. The question is, how are we going to respond to Jesus today? What will we do with his words?